The 2014 regulations are universally regarded as one of the worst changes in F1 history. Although it did give us an interesting title fight between the two Mercedes drivers after years of Red Bull domination, the cars themselves in almost every aspect were just terrible. They were ugly to the point of being offensive, they sounded terrible, and relatively speaking, they were also slow. So much so that during one weekend there were Formula 2 cars that were quicker than some of the Formula 1 cars. And now, the weekend in question was the weekend of the 2014 Spanish Grand Prix, and to clarify going forward, technically the second tier at the time was called GP2 instead of Formula 2, but fundamentally they were and are the exact same series, so for the sake of continuity compared to what we have now, that is why I'm going to call it Formula 2. During the Saturday qualifying session in Formula 1, the cars that were eliminated in Q1 were Jean-Éric Vergne in the Toro Rosso, Adrian Sutil in the Sauber, Max Chilton and Jules Bianchi in the Marussia, Marcus Ericsson and Kamui Kobayashi in the Caterhams, and then Pastor Maldonado in the Lotus, who didn't officially set a time as he crashed out. Because it's Maldonado, so of course he did. Meanwhile, in GP2, their qualifying was on the Friday in almost identical dry conditions during a 30-minute session, and out of the 26 drivers that participated, 13 of them set a time quicker than the slowest time set by Kamui Kobayashi. In fact, if you combine the qualifying times to form a theoretical grid, you would have had Arthur Peak ahead of Kobayashi, Tom Dillman ahead of Marcus Ericsson, 8 different drivers ahead of Jules Bianchi, and then 3 different drivers ahead of Max Chilton. And given that Rio Haryanto and Tom Dillman were driving for the Caterham Formula 2 team, that literally meant that both of the Caterham Formula 2 cars were quicker than the Caterham Formula 1 cars. To be honest, ignoring the Caterhams and Marussias who were clear backmarkers in 2014, I think what's even more impressive is that the pole time of Stefan Riquelme was only 7/10 away from the Sauber of Sutil, and only 1 second away from the Toro Rosso of Vergne, and that's the car that finished 7th in the Constructors' Championship. And now, technically speaking, this wouldn't be the first or even the last time that a Formula 2 car would set a quicker time than some of the slower Formula 1 cars. This also happened in Monaco, Silverstone, and Hungary that same year, but that was always because circumstances such as weather or incidents prevented the backmarkers from setting quicker times. And never had there been such an overlap between the faster Formula 2 drivers and the slower Formula 1 drivers to the point where 13 cars were quick enough to comfortably make it onto the grid. And not only was this abnormal to say the least, but it also didn't go unnoticed by the F1 paddock. Sergio Perez, who was driving for Force India at the time, didn't hold back whatsoever, saying, "When you look at the difference with GP2, I think it's a little bit embarrassing that the GP2 cars are so close to us with the budgets they have. I think we have at least 8 times more budget than a GP2 team, so to be only 1.5 to 2 seconds quicker is a bit embarrassing." So what factors contributed to making this happen? Well, firstly let's talk about the F2 side of the coin. The cars at the time were the 3rd generation of Dallara designed F2 cars called the Dallara GP2-11. They were used until the end of the 2017 season, which was significant because that was also the season where the series was renamed back from GP2 to Formula 2. That made 2017 a bit of an odd crossover year looking back, where the cars were still the same ones as they were in GP2, but the series was now rebranded as Formula 2. Since 2018, the Dallara F2-2018 has been used in Formula 2, which we are now very familiar with, and of course in 2024 there will be a brand new generation of Formula 2 car, which was revealed in Monza 2023. The newer generation of Formula 2 cars that the likes of Russell, Norris and Albon drove in 2018 were approximately a second slower across a range of tracks than the previous generation 2017 cars that Leclerc took to his Formula 2 championship. In fact, in 2017, Leclerc actually set a lap record for a Formula 2 car around Monaco with a time of 1 minute 19.309, and to give you some context, that is faster than Michael Schumacher's pole position time in his 2000 championship-winning Ferrari. Whilst these cars were by definition second-tier machinery, make no mistake, they were very quick single-seaters nonetheless. So now let's look at the Formula 1 side to all of this, and I want to say right from the off, that it's definitely not because the drivers weren't good enough. When you look at the 4 drivers from Marussia and Caterham, Max Chilton, after F1 raced in IndyCar for 6 years and is also the Goodwood Hill Climb record holder, which I was very lucky enough to see in person. Marcus Ericsson is an Indy 500 winner. Jules Bianchi was a talented Ferrari prospect who went on to score points in the Marussia. And Kamui Kobayashi is one of the most decorated modern drivers, winning the Le Mans 24-hour, the Daytona 24-hour, the World Endurance Championship 2 times, and also stood on the F1 podium in 2012 for Sauber at his home Grand Prix. These drivers are by no means incapable, and whilst I'm not saying that other drivers wouldn't have done a better job, I don't really put this embarrassing situation on them. In general, everyone already knew going into the season that the brand new generation of 2014 cars were going to be a lot slower than in 2013. They were heavier with the introduction of the hybrid power unit. They also had a lot less downforce to help make them more raceable. Where have we heard that one before in Formula 1? And Pirelli also introduced much harder tyres for 2014 as a response to the puncture controversies in 2013. Even so, once the cars actually got on the track during pre-season testing in Jerez and Bahrain, I think the drivers were actually surprised at just how much slower the cars were, and already there were comparisons being made to the pace compared to the Formula 2 cars. Caterham's Kamui Kobayashi said, "We are not in race conditions here, but if we were in race conditions, I think I should bring a GP2 car. The lap time is still quicker in GP2. We need to work, but in this moment, if we were to race, I think it's not Formula 1. Similar sentiment was also shared by McLaren's Jenson Button in Jerez, who said, "We'll be quicker than GP2, but not that much quicker. Then again, it was the first test with a very new package. They'll be a lot closer on certain circuits. This year's tyres we think are half a second slower. The cars are also heavier, about 1 to 1.2 seconds through weight, so that's 1.6, 1.8 seconds already from those 2 changes." In fact, if we use Spain as a comparison, in 2013 Nico Rosberg set pole with a time of 1 minute 20.718, whilst in 2014 the pole time by Lewis Hamilton was just a 1 minute 25.232, meaning the gap between the 2 cars was over 4.5 seconds. The hybrid element of those cars had a huge impact because it was very clear that we were now entering an engine formula where the power unit had a disproportionate sway in your performance. If you had a Mercedes PU, that would automatically make you competitive, as we saw with the likes of Force India and Williams, and even Lotus when they switched in 2015, whilst Renault and Ferrari in that early era really struggled with performance and especially reliability. It's no surprise that the teams at the back were all using Ferrari and Renault power units, and when you combine that with the fact that Caterham and Marussia were always historically backmarkers that were a step or 2 behind on the aero side, it was a perfect mix of circumstances that led to them being slower than the Formula 2 cars that weekend. I don't think it's going to come as a massive surprise to the people that weren't watching F1 back then that 2014 would be Caterham's last season in Formula 1, and Marussia, or Manor as they later became, were not far behind, folding at the end of 2016. The hybrid revolution had increased the cost of what it took to go racing, and with no results, little sponsorship, and with no budget cap at the time, those backmarker teams just weren't financially viable anymore. Looking back at the late V8 era, which was just before 2014, I think that there's a lot of people, including me, that loved the look and sound of the cars like the McLaren and Red Bull, and then from 2017 onwards, although some of the racing definitely suffered, I think a lot of people also loved the wider, higher downforce and complex aero cars, especially from 2020 and 2021, and even now with the ground effect cars. Although they do have their critics, and rightly so, I still think that they deliver on the wow factor from the speed and looks point of view with some great cars like the Ferrari from the past couple of years, which I think has been stunning, and even the Aston Martin, which is one of my personal favourites. The 2014 to 16 generation of cars, for many different reasons that I've talked about, including looks, sound, performance, and incidents like these, I think will go down as one of the most unloved eras of Formula 1 cars. It's no coincidence that at just 3 years, This rule cycle was very short-lived, and that one of the motivations behind the 2017 aero changes was to make the cars faster and more spectacular. Faster cars, regardless of how spectacular they are, will never guarantee better racing. There are loads of other series with closer championship battles and even more exciting on-track battles as well, but part of the allure and prestige of Formula 1 is that it's the pinnacle of motorsport, and to most people, that means speed. Even though this isn't actually true, when cars are slower, it feels like it's less of a technical accomplishment, even if it isn't. But I do think there comes a point where the technical accomplishment has to be represented on track by performance that should feel out of reach to other series. And in that era, as evidenced by incidents like Spain 2014, they just weren't. Well, there you have it. I hope you did enjoy this video looking back at a bizarre incident in recent Formula 1 history, and if you did and want to support the channel, then don't forget to subscribe. That would be massively appreciated, and I'll see you in the next one.